What up, you guys? Welcome back to Feral Publications YouTube channel, daily uploads to open up my own shop. And today we're gonna get into some of the more like nitty gritty, like nuts and bolts of like my theory going into the comic book shop, and like what I'm basing my actions on, and how I'm sampling these thoughts, right? And I've talked about it before on the channel, but I just want to re-emphasize because I want this to be kind of like an all encapsulating video that relates to this. But there's a book called Lean Startup, and in it there's this concept of the minimal viable product. The way they explain it, the way I understand it, is you try to find what you can do now that's as close to the end result as you can. And while you're doing that, what you're doing is you're refining the process, refining the product, refining the service, whatever it is, right? Until you get to that end result. That's something that I've always taken to heart, and I've always tried to implement, whether it was through Dirt Dog and other startup ventures that I was a part of in some capacity, right? This idea that like, what can we start with today that I can start scaling up to that point? So Feral Publication always had its aim to just, make books, make comics, make other, media. And the idea is like, okay, well, what can I start with today, right? Zines is probably the most price conscious, probably the easiest way to get into publishing, you know what I mean? And so then hence we started. With the comic book, it was the same idea, right? With the comic book shop, it was the same idea, this idea of like, what can I start doing today that ultimately can lead me into my brick and mortar location, right? If the idea is to sell comic books in a brick and mortar, why not try selling comics online? It was a simple idea. The other thing I really thought about and considered was how free comic book day, at least in my area, has slowly been declining. Free comic book day, for a lot of people that don't realize, was the way that the comic book industry, did their customer development, right? That would lead eventually to acquisition, right? You come to free comic book day, you get one free comic, you like it so much, you start picking up the title. Simple enough as a concept, as a theory. And so then there's two things that I saw within the comic book industry that I really felt like I needed to curtail. One, I felt like a lot of people have been priced out of comic books. I remember being young and going to a comic book shop with $5 and walking out of there with a stack, And I understand that all these things have made, comic books that much more expensive. But in the end of the day, like, comic books are supposed to be like working class literature. They're supposed to be something that anyone can pick up anywhere and just read and have fun and really dive deep in either a good horror story, a good philosophical story, right? Slice of life about like real human interactions and relationships. You can't price working class people out, and you can't put them between a rock and a hard place. So that's one problem that I saw, that people have been priced out. The other thing that I've also noticed is that a lot of comic book shops don't understand the mission, right? Like, how many, and I dare you guys, go to a comic book shop and see whether or not the clerk even approaches you. Like, if you don't say anything to them, you don't make eye contact with them, would they approach you? I dare to say that on average, I have not been approached by comic book shop clerks. They don't approach me, they don't talk to me, they don't try to curate things that they think I would be interested in reading. They're just housing shit. And I get it, they don't want to be salesmen. They believe that the comic books will sell themselves. That's just lazy, straight up. And I know that to be a fact because people were telling me if it's not Marvel or DC, they're not going to sell. And I had a stack of Valiant graphic novels that are now sold out. This is the last one that I have now, that stack of 5. And I've sold other graphic novels as well online. So there is a proof of concept, right? And what do? I talk about the comics, I talk about the trade paperbacks, I talk about the more nuanced aspect of it. Everything has a comic book history, right? Like when you talk about Valiant comics, for most people, no one gives a shit, right? Because the average reader doesn't know the story of Valiant, doesn't understand how Jim Shooter left Marvel and created Valiant, and how Valiant really tried to reconceptualize comic books and made pulpy sci-fi comics. And then I started talking about the Image crossover with Valiant and Magnus Robot, Turok, how Turok was also a part of the Valiant universe and also became a video game, and they relaunched the video. Like, there's this massive history behind Valiant Comics. If you don't talk about it, if you don't communicate that to them, no one knows that, right? So it's twofold. It's one, making sure that I communicate the value of all these books, right? Whether it be the artist, the company, the universe, like whatever that might be, right? Communicate that to the potential reader. But then after that, don't price out the reader. Like, that's the problem I think that the comic book industry has. Like, I see so many independent creators right now, they're pricing their books at $15, $20 an issue. And it's like, man, like, I don't think you understand the assignment, because this is supposed to be, again, working class literature. This is supposed to be something that a guy can show up with $5 and get something nice to read. And I think that that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring it back to that, but as well communicate all the value. And I told myself, if I can do these two things well, I can see this thing starting to scale up. And I'm happy to say that I've been able to do it good enough that I know I can lean into it just more. And that's why, again, I'm going back to getting these graphic novels. What's the plan with the graphic novels? Again, it's twofold, right? Yes, it's having a damn good price point, but it's also having a damn interesting story. What I'm looking for is like evergreen comic books. Comic books that have sales points that aren't just because the next movie's coming out. And I think that for most comic book shops, that's the problem that they found themselves in, that they just thought that the movies were gonna help them move the comic books. But the reality is, just like any good library will have a librarian that can help you and tell you, oh, that's what you like? Then read this, then read that. Oh, is that what you like? Then you might want to see that artist's other titles. So like, for instance, one of the books that I'm going to be getting is by Neil Adams. Now, I think a lot of people know Neil Adams. I specifically love the Green Lantern, Green Arrow team up that he did. But Neil Adams is well known in the industry, straight up in comic books. But few people know this, but he wrote and drew his own like creator-owned title called Blood. And like that for me is very interesting and something that I feel has a multitude of sales point. Like Neil Adams is not very well known for writing. He's known for the art. But what does he do when it's creator-owned, right? And like there's no guardrails and he can just make kind of what he wants. And for me, that's already interesting. Same thing with Jack Kirby's work. It's like his work has defined so much of the comic book industry, so much of it, right? And it's like he had certain themes and concepts that he would continuously return to. And I think that that's something that's evergreen. Like you can always communicate that value and communicate that story to new readers. And that's the thing of like, I really think that my demographic or like who I'm trying to do this for is like new readers. Someone like me, like if you get me the right book, I could potentially drop, anywhere from $50 to $100, right? If it's the right book. Now, a new reader, that's a big commitment. I don't think they would do that. So knowing that the price point that I'm trying to bring to them is the easiest step into the comic book industry, right? It's the easiest step into getting into comics. Coupling that with like years of just knowing and reading about the comic book industry, right? When you compound those two things together, it's like if I can get them the right price and again, communicate the value, why this matters, who Neil Adams is. If they don't know who Neil Adams is, if they don't know who Jack Kirby is, right? If they don't know who Mark Millar is, like all these figures within the comic book industry that I like and think highly of, if you don't know who they are, then let me communicate, what that is and why that matters in the comic book world, right? So those are the two things, right? And like I said, proof of concept is already there because the dollar bin comics I'm selling online have been going crazy, as well as the graphic novels that started going crazy. And going back to the overall idea of like customer development acquisition, I dropped one zine on each purchase. Now people are starting to buy zines as well. So like it all compounds and builds off each other. Some of the theory around this also was a lot of times in business, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to look at the market and see how the big companies are doing it and versus how the little companies are doing it. And so you're kind of going off of the mean, the mode, and the medium, right? And you're kind of constructing your concept. But just about every big publisher, regardless of what kind of publishing, right? So that means comic book companies included, right? When I did the math, like you can see that for just about every publisher that's well known and well established, anywhere from 60 to 75% of their gross revenue for the year come from their back catalog. And that's a publishing term, right? Back catalog versus front catalog. Front catalog being new titles, new things that they're trying. Back catalog, things that already work, that are already established. So for me, I started thinking to myself, Feral Publication as a company doesn't have a large back catalog to build off of. But what's another way of reconceptualizing like a back catalog for a startup publishing company? And that's when I thought about this idea of like the comic book shop, right, as a way of like developing customers and really bringing them in, and then trying to get that buy-in to Feral Comics, to Feral Publication, and what we're doing, right? If we can become trusted, myself included, as a well-known connoisseur of comics, comic book history, right? Someone that can communicate the value of these things to folks, I think that people are more likely to trust me when I make mines. And that's kind of my thought on that. And not only that, but again, if most big companies are only surviving off their back catalog, off of things that are already established and work well, then why wouldn't I, add that to the shop and use that just like the big publishers are to pay the bills, and then the rest of it, they venture out and try shit. And if it doesn't work, it's fine. They're not gonna go belly up because the back catalog keeps them flowing. That's where this concept came from. This is where that thought came from. And as I executed it, the sales have shown the proof of concept. It shows that this thing will work if I work it. So I'm gonna continue that. One of the things I definitely plan to do is do pop-ups. And I definitely plan to do them getting closer to Christmas, where I feel like I will have a better handle on inventory, because I'm having the problem now where I've already sold out on 2 separate occasions of multiple items, zines included. And I didn't have an easy time recuperating from getting either dollar bin comics, getting graphic novels, or making more zines, because I'm in a situation now where like I'm getting sales daily. And so like I have to just remember that and really pace myself, because I'm still making my stuff, making my art, but as well all the other things that I do in my day-to-day life. So in a nutshell, I hope that kind of explains more of the abstract stuff and some of the nitty-gritty tangible steps that I decided to implement based off of that, right? The idea of always looking for the minimal viable product, right? What I can do now that is something I can scale in that direction that I want to go into, and starting and then scaling and refining throughout the process, right? Really figuring out what does or doesn't work. Maybe I do buy a bunch of IDW trade paperbacks and I can't move them, right? And then at that point, like I know, stay away from that. Maybe I do buy Jack Kirby's, other more obscure titles, and no one cares, no one shows up for it. These are all possibilities, but as I try and refine, like, you know what I mean, then we're gonna really figure that out. The other thing, steady sales volume, right, versus reliable sales channels versus sales volume. That's really gonna just depend, right? Someone was asking me, how do you know when to scale to the next thing? And the reality is that business, no matter how much formulas you can add to it, there's obviously a way to write, a hypothesis and to test it, even in business, and to really see whether or not there's something to build off of, or something that you might as well cut loose and just call it a loss. That's something that for sure there's a way of doing that, but what is that magic number is going to be more intuitive and more of a gut feeling. You know what I mean? Some people would say when you make your first 100, then you have something. I was a little more hesitant and was shot the number a little higher than that. But once I hit that number, I knew like, okay, there's something here for me to really build off of. Let me reinvest all this and start making, tangible thoughts and plans, which some of the stuff that I'd like to do, I don't like to talk about until after I'm done it. Everything that I'm discussing now is not something that I hope to do. This is the stuff that I already did, right? This is the stuff that has gotten me to this point now where I'm in a much better situation. The brand is known better. People know the zines, talk about the comics. People are excited for the next zine. Sold out on a bunch of things on multiple occasions. Like, this is after the fact, right? And now is that point where I saw this thing working, and now I'm trying to scale up to the next point. But that's all the stuff up to this point. Moving forward, obviously, I'm gonna have just the next step of the scaling up, which is kind of what we're currently doing. And you know, like I said, I like to talk about what I've done and not necessarily what I'm going to do. But all right, you guys, I know this was a long-winded one, and I hope it was made sense. I definitely have my notes, but again, definitely hope that this video adds value. And like I said, this is one of those moments in time, I think, where like people need to build, right? They need to build to feel empowered, but also to build community and also to protect their community. And that's kind of where I'm up to, and that's where I'm at. And so if you guys are down with that, please like, share, subscribe. And guess what? I do this shit daily, so I'll be back tomorrow. Lates.